Hi, I'm Katrina, and this is Boldly Challenging Ableism. I'm your host, Katrina Simons. I'm the Community Program Specialist at the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota. This program explores various topics that impact people with disabilities in our community. Each episode addresses a different aspect of our society within the context of ableism. Ableism is the prejudice that stems from the belief or belief system that assumes someone is less capable or less worthy because of a real or perceived difference in ability or function. On this program, we hope to answer some questions you may have been afraid to ask, or maybe some you didn't even know you had. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Boldly. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to do our part 2 with Emma. Thank you for joining us, Emma. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for coming back. Can you tell us a little bit about what your knowledge was of disability prior, or what was your knowledge of disability prior to becoming a teacher?
Yeah. I feel like I had probably minimal knowledge of disability. I think I had a little bit of, like more obvious physical disabilities. I knew a little bit about those, and I definitely, because both my parents were teachers, I would hear about students, maybe like students on the autism spectrum. But beyond that, not a ton before I went to college.
Okay. And the conversations that they would have, did they make you feel like teaching students with special needs would be supported in your job?
Yeah, I think so. They're both elementary teachers, so they have like a lot of support.
Okay, that's good.
So I would hear a lot about that, yeah.
Yeah. So the way, I don't know if other people feel this way, but I kind of feel like nowadays, because I work mostly with adults, and to be clear, my job is not a teacher, and I'm not with people all the time. But I feel like I've seen a trend where there's a lot of support for inclusion in the early years, and there's not as much in the later years, like junior high and high school. And to be fair, not to say that my experience is representative of all people, but my friend who was a speech therapist in the early years, that is also a trend that she has noticed.
Yeah, I would say I've seen that too. I'm sure there's reasons behind that as well that special ed teachers have.
Yeah.
And I would also imagine like working with younger kids can be a lot more fun than older kids sometimes. There's probably more paras who would want to work with younger kids. Yeah.
Well, and I just know from my own experience of being in junior high and high school and in elementary, like not that everybody's the same, but by the time I got to junior high and high school, I was resistant to support because it made me, like, it emphasized my otherness kind of. And so I would imagine that people with different kinds of disabilities face that as well.
I would think I've seen that too.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your teaching certification and how much of it involved training to work with students who need extra support in the classroom?
Yeah. So I did 4 years of college, but most of my education classes were within the 3 years. Not my first year. It was just mostly like generals. And so I had lots of classes during that time, and then also like practicum hours that I would do in schools. So I did like a mix of middle school and high school because my licensure is both. So I would go to the schools and mostly observe and then maybe teach like a lesson or two. And then I also did a full semester of student teaching at the end of college. I would say there wasn't a ton of instruction on teaching students with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak for every education like prep program, but at mine, I don't think there was a ton of specifically about teaching students with disabilities. But I definitely got some experience when I was in schools, seeing how teachers do that.
Yeah. I think, okay, so like in some fields, like in, I'm not saying that all fields have to do this, but like in fields like medicine or in fields where you like subspecialize, you can choose to learn more about people with disabilities. Was that ever an option or not really?
Not within like the undergrad. You could get your master's in special ed, and that would be more. But mostly the specializing was in terms of like which subject you teach.
Okay, and did you have to take like intro to special ed? Not even that?
No. I think it was more just built into
the other classes.
Yeah,
Okay.
if at all.
Okay. What are your responsibilities as a general education teacher in regards to like IEPs and special considerations for like that, or like the paperwork type considerations?
Sure. Yeah. So I have to read and understand the IEPs. So I get them all at the beginning of the each trimester for all my kids, and I read them and I go through them. I personally put them all into like a spreadsheet so I can organize them better because I have a lot of kids. And then in terms of like paperwork, I don't have to do much of the paperwork. I do go to IEP meetings.
Okay.
And that's where we look at the paperwork with the special ed teacher.
Okay. And then, so this is maybe a little embarrassing, but I'm really old now, so I really don't care. When I was in like 7 through 12, all of the gen ed teachers were invited to my IEP meeting, but I think I can remember like one general ed teacher who came the whole time. Is that still the case with the students that you teach? Or, like I know it's a little bit different because you teach 9th grade, which is obviously very different than like senior year. And so maybe that's not a requirement. But my thing was like none of the general education teachers came until there was a problem. And so nobody actually knew how I was doing in those gen ed classes, which was a big deal because most of my classes were gen ed classes.
Yeah, we're all invited. I try to go to as many as I can because I know for some teachers it's hard because a lot of times it ends up going out of contract hours. And a lot of other teachers have like kids that they need to get to and they have like, a time. And so I try to go to as many as I can because I don't have those responsibilities.
Well, also like I could see it being like you just don't have time even outside of your contract hours, even if you don't have kids.
Yeah.
To go to all the meetings because it's not like you're only going to IEP meetings.
For sure. And they're not, the meetings always start within contract hours, but sometimes they run long and that's okay. I mean, it's good. Like we need to talk about the kids and they're only once a year.
Right.
So I would say, I don't often go to a meeting where all of the general ed teachers are there. There's usually more than one though. Like,
okay. But that's so nice. I love that for the kids.
It is good. It's nice.
I love it.
And it's nice to hear from other teachers too about how they're doing in other classes.
Or like, is there a different way that you're supporting them in your class that I could implement in my class? Even though classes are different, so you can't always do it.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about all the different kinds of needs that you're expected to support in your classroom that the learners might have?
Yeah. So I would say there's like kind of different categories, obviously, of like different needs that I have in my classroom. So I have some students with like more of like a physical disability. And then there's some with like learning disabilities, or I also have sometimes more like cognitive disabilities. Not always though, sometimes in 9th grade.
Yeah. And you don't have like a co-teacher?
No.
Okay. And you don't have like a teacher's aide?
Not often.
Okay.
In my 3 years, I've had 2 times, like 2 class periods where I've had a para assisting a student.
Okay. So it's usually like you and 30 kids?
Yeah.
Okay. Is 30 an accurate class size?
I would say that's an accurate average for me. Okay. Yeah. It can range, though, from like 25 to 35.
Okay. And then can you talk a little bit about like what specific need might somebody with a learning disability have that you are expected to provide?
Yeah.
By yourself?
So for like the learning disabilities, a lot of times the accommodations are things like getting extra time on assignments or tests, maybe like where they're sitting in the room, like whether it's close to a window or, sometimes students like get anxious about sitting in the middle of the room. They want to be like on the wall or they need to be in the front because they need more reminders, need to be closer to me. And then I also have things like students will get like completed copies of notes to follow along with during like a lecture.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
For them.
Or taking tests outside of the room.
Okay, and when they take the test outside of the room, who's watching them take the test?
They take it in a special ed room where there's either the special ed teacher or a para there.
So there
monitoring.
is somebody there to monitor the student while taking the test?
Yeah.
But you are expected to have the test in the room by the time they take the test?
Yes.
And to make sure that they're out of the room when they take it, and to make sure that the teacher knows if there's anything they need to do during the test so the student can be successful.
Yes, because some students need it read to them out loud and stuff like that.
So that would be a lot on you. And then how many kids on average might you, I'll ask it this way. What is the maximum number of students you have that would need support in the same class period? So like out of those 30 kids, are there one that needs help at a time, 5 that needs help at a time?
Well, I would say, like, I don't know if this is exactly what your question was, but like in a class, I usually have somewhere, if it's a class of 30, I have somewhere between like 5 and 10 who have IEPs and 504s.
Oh my God, that's so many
in
kids.
that class. Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, and that can be a range of like need levels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the needs of students with physical disabilities that you might have to support?
A lot of times that has to do with like where they're sitting.
Okay.
Or kind of that kind of thing. So like I have different heights of tables. So I have some tables that are like, you're fully sitting, or I have some with stools that are taller and then where you could even stand at them. So I do have some kids who, maybe not with physical disabilities, but some kids who like to stand because it
like
helps
a
them.
sensory need.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So then I put them at the taller tables.
Yeah.
But sometimes, kids with a physical disability, it would be like where they're sitting, or maybe they need to have like no one on their right side or no one on their left side, like depending on.
So they can get out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's usually what it is.
Okay. And then do you generally have assigned seating in your class?
I do. I always have assigned seating.
Okay. So you need to know before you make the seating chart who needs what?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that would be confusing.
Yeah.
Because you'd actually have to know that right before you met the kid.
Yeah.
Right? Because you've read their IEP, but you haven't met them in person.
Yes.
Which would also, that's a lot to add.
Yeah. I usually give the first week of letting them sit where they want. And so I can kind of get to know them. And then I use then I make a seating chart based on IEPs, but also just based on all the other kids, what I know about them.
And do you have any kids with like multiple needs? So like somebody with a physical disability and a learning disability, or somebody with a physical disability and an intellectual disability?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. And what are their, like, what kinds of needs would that person need all at one time?
Usually when I've had a student like that, they have a para with them.
Okay.
So that's really helpful. Because sometimes it is like a physical thing, like maybe they need help writing or they need to dictate.
Okay.
Because they write slower. Because sometimes, like they know what's going on or they understand it, but they can't get it on the paper. Yeah. And so then a para is really helpful for that. Yeah.
Okay. And then do you ever have times when like you're expected to read directions out loud to a certain student within the class of 30 people? And like you're not allowed to tell the other kids that this student needs help. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I don't know if, I guess maybe there are times where that's specifically written into the IEP. Not necessarily written like the teacher must read all instructions, but like that might be kind of what the kid needs. Usually how I go about that is I usually have, anytime we're doing like, I don't know, a worksheet or an activity where there's a lot of directions, I always have some way of making the students read it out loud. Okay. Like either they popcorn or like at their table. And so then that kind of requires someone else to read it out loud for them. Okay. If I can't get to them.
Okay. Do you ever have, like when you're doing popcorn, do you ever have students who one of their accommodations is that they're like not supposed to be asked to read out loud? Okay, and then what happens then if you're doing popcorn? Okay, sorry. For the listeners who don't know what popcorn is where you have a kid read a paragraph and then they can popcorn it to the next kid to read the paragraph. So you don't necessarily know that you're the next reader, which can be stressful if you're an emerging reader and can be extra stressful if you're an emerging reader with anxiety or any disability that causes reading to be more difficult.
Yeah, if I have that, then I usually... Like if I have a student like that in my class, then I either won't do popcorn with that hour, or I'll specifically say like, okay, for this activity today, the person that's sitting in, the front left seat of the table at every table will do the reading. And then I make sure that's not the kid that can't do that.
How do you remember that? I would not remember. Do you make yourself little Post-its?
Yeah, I always have that spreadsheet that I make. Like I always have that as a tab on my computer so I can always like quickly reference it when I'm teaching. Otherwise, I only really need to do that the first couple weeks, and then I have gotten to know the kids well enough that I can kind of just remember.
Okay, well, I guess too. Okay, so like I'm not a teacher, but I can imagine like it's kind of a classroom is kind of like. I mean, okay, I don't want to say a classroom's like a family, but a classroom is kind of like a team, and you would learn over the course of the trimester what the different people on the team need. I just feel like it would be overwhelming for you to have to remember all that for 6 periods, because in elementary school, you would have to remember 30 different things, but there'd be the same 30 different things for the entire day.
Right.
Not different 30 things, not 30 different things every 45 minutes.
Right.
Which I feel like would be stressful.
It can be.
Yeah.
It in the beginning of the trimester as it is when it's all new kids. But over time, you just get to know them.
Okay. Do you have you can just think of like the average kid, because I know there's a range, but your kids that have extra support needs in the classroom, do you have ones that know it and are comfortable with it, or do you mostly have kids who like would rather just like never read than tell people that they need help reading? Like, where do they fall on that continuum? Because I did the whole thing.
Yeah, I think most kids, mostly by high school, are kind of aware of where they're at and are mostly willing to ask for help, or they know they need help, but are maybe a little bit afraid to ask for help, or like don't want to be seen as different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I had a couple peers in high school, and to be fair, they weren't in a lot of my general ed classes, but I think I had a couple peers in high school who were not able to read effectively. And I just want to say for a second, as someone who works with adults with intellectual disabilities, reading can come in a lot of different levels. So a lot of times people will say that they can read, but whether they can access the information in the text at the same level as other people is a different issue. And I knew who they were because I was also in special ed, and I don't know, I guess it just came naturally for me to look out for that kind of thing. But I wondered how they felt about the fact that they had obvious support needs that other people didn't need. And I'm just always curious.
Yeah, I think in high school too, kids can mask it sometimes.
Yeah,
even if I know that like they maybe need help with reading.
Yeah.
Sometimes they seem like they've gotten really good at like, picking up on what other people are saying, or and so then it's harder for me to tell. Like, even if I know from the IEP that they might need help with reading, it's hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah. That is something that I always sort of like wondered about, or like how to, because like in an elementary school classroom, the adult can step in and sort of like manage that situation, and the other kids won't catch on. But in high school, the other kids will catch on, and I worry a little. I worry about that. I mean, I don't worry about it, but
there's definitely,
I feel for that situation.
Yeah, as like the teacher, there's definitely a balance you have to find of helping them, but not exposing them in a way that they don't want to be.
Yeah. Do you think kids that don't need support are generally open to the fact that some people do need support? Or are they resentful that like this class is easier for this person because they don't have to do X, Y, or Z?
I think it depends. I try to just not really let them know that other kids, like I try to provide support in a way that is not obvious to other students.
Yeah.
So I don't exactly know. I do think it depends on different kids.
Okay. Are you given opportunities to discuss, like, if you have a question or a frustration about supporting learners with additional support needs in the classroom, do you ever have an opportunity to talk to other teachers about that frustration without talking about a specific kid, or is that not even possible? I mean, I suppose, okay, I don't think I asked it the right way, because I suppose, like, I know, like, teachers can have, time where they, like, in the staff lunch where they talk to each other, and they can obviously vent if they want to, but, like, do you feel like you're allowed to talk to other teachers about the frustrations you have around supporting learners with extra needs, if you have, like, questions?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I think so. I think I feel comfortable talking to other teachers.
Okay.
I mean, I go to the special ed teachers at my school for help.
Okay.
And that's really good.
Okay. Do you find that they are able to provide you with practical solutions?
Yes.
Okay. Because I don't want to be rude, but I have been to experts in the disability field who offer solutions, but that solution is not like, you can't implement it because it's not practical in the setting, but you don't feel like that happens?
No, at my school at least, I don't know, I can't speak for other schools, but at my school, all of the special ed case managers also team teach at least 1 hour of the day. Like, they team teach an English class or math class. So I think they have a really good, like, they're really good at providing practical solutions because they're in the classroom. Like, they're in a general ed classroom at some point during the day, so they can they have good ideas for that.
Yeah. And then my other question is, there have been a lot of efforts to improve inclusion in the classroom in, like, the last 2 decades. Well, actually for my entire life, but mostly in the last 2 decades. And so some people say that we have done that really well because we've increased the amount of inclusion in general ed classrooms, which was the goal. Mm-hmm. Other people say that we have done that at the expense of general ed teachers and the expense of the students who need the most, because we haven't provided the correct amount of support for the students as we did that. So, like, we took away the special ed class, but we didn't replace the supports that were happening in that classroom. Where do you fall on that? How do you feel about that?
I think overall it can be hard to just provide support to the number of kids I have, whether they're special ed or not. Okay. And so I think in some ways that maybe has kind of been at the detriment. But I also think we do a pretty good job of still providing, at least at my school, still providing supports. Like, most students in special ed still have access to their case manager daily or have a class with them daily.
That's nice.
Yeah. So I think that's a good support.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you feel that we've done that. Do you ever wish that in high school it was, like, more common to have, like, an additional support person in the room?
Yes. Yes.
Do you just generally feel that way about everything?
Yeah, I think every teacher would probably say that, or decrease class sizes.
Okay. I guess I never understood. I mean, I get it. High school students are older and may or may not need support, but I guess I never. And I understand staffing shortage, but I guess I never understood why, as students get older, we just decided that 1 to 30 instead of, like, 3 to 15 was an appropriate ratio to graduate to. I mean, I understand how typical people are basically supposed to be adults when they leave high school, but it never computed in my head. Okay, and then the last thing I want to ask is, what do you want people to know or do to support learners with disabilities in your classroom?
I think the biggest thing is having parents that are supportive at home and communicating. Like, parents who respond to my emails or my phone calls is very, very helpful.
I love that for all of us. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. I think we're out of time, but it has been very enjoyable, and thank you for doing 2 parts. That was spot on.
Thanks for having me.
Love that.
Boldly Challenging Ableism is a co-production of AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota. For more information, please visit ici.umn.edu.